Sign it, Bella, just sign the damn paper. His voice, a low, wet rasp, made her skin crawl. Marcus, that viper, thought he had her cornered. Another inflated invoice. Another lie for her to swallow. But here's the thing. He underestimated the fire in her belly, the silent promise she'd made to her dying father. They all did. They saw the tired waitress, the girl with the perpetually worried eyes. They have no clue about Liam, about the steel in her soul forged in a crucible of impossible choices. This wasn't about money anymore, not just. This was about dignity. This was about showing them all just how wrong they were. Big mistake. But what he found wasn't in the cold ledgers or the simmering sauces. He found it in a forgotten alcove in the form of a young waitress, her body racked with silent, desperate sobs. He thought he was investigating a business problem, but he had just stumbled into the heart of a human tragedy, and he knew with chilling certainty that he could not simply walk away. The Gilded Spoon. The name was his late father's idea, a monument to opulence, a promise of unparalleled luxury nestled in the heart of downtown Chicago. To the world, it was the flagship of Sterling Hospitality Group, a five-star culinary jewel, where a single dinner could cost more than a month's rent for the people who washed its dishes. To Alexander Sterling, it was a legacy, and lately a source of a deep, gnawing unease. Dressed in a worn gray hoodie and a faded Chicago Cubs cap pulled low over his brow, Alexander looked like any other tourist trying to escape the biting autumn wind. He called himself Arthur Page, a freelance writer, nursing a single cup of coffee for the past hour. From his secluded corner booth, he had a perfect, unobstructed view of the restaurant's grand theater, the low hum of contented chatter, the clinking of heavy silverware on fine china, the bleatic dance of the waitstaff. It was all exactly as he had designed it, yet something was profoundly wrong. The smiles on the staff's faces were brittle, like fine glass, ready to shatter. The seamless service he prided his establishments on was punctuated by moments of jarring friction. He watched a busboy nearly collide with a waiter, earning a venomous glare from a man in a tailored suit who patrolled the floor like a shark in a fish tank that Alexander surmised was the manager, Marcus Thorne. Online reviews had mentioned him by name, painting a picture of a petty tyrant. Alexander's attention, however, was drawn to one waitress in particular. She moved with a weary grace, her shoulders slightly stooped as if carrying an invisible weight. Her name tag read Isabella. She had a kind face framed by dark hair, pulled back to a simple, severe ponytail, but it was her eyes that held him captive. They were a deep, sorrowful brown, and in them he saw flickering exhaustion that no amount of professional training could hide. He watched her attend to a table of four, a boisterous, demanding group celebrating a promotion. They sent their wine back twice, complained that their steaks were a degree too rare, and spoke to her with a casual condescension that made Alexander's jaw clench. Through it all, Isabella maintained a mask of placid courtesy. She smiled, she apologized, she fetched, she carried. She was the perfect employee. But as she turned away from the table after another thinly veiled insult about her speed, the mask slipped. For a fraction of a second, her face crumpled, a portrait of raw despair, so intense it was a physical blow. Alexander felt an unfamiliar pang in his chest. He was a man who dealt in numbers, in profit margins, in strategic acquisitions. He hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by indulging in sentiment, yet watching this young woman navigate her private hell in his palace of fine dining felt like a personal failure. This was the sickness he had come to find. It wasn't just about declining food quality or slow service. It was a rot in the soul of his company. An hour later, as the lunch rush began to W in, Isabella disappeared. Alexander, excusing himself from his table, followed a hunch. He bypassed the main restrooms and headed down a service corridor near the kitchens. The air here was thick with the smell of grease and bleach, a stark contrast to the perfumed dining room. He pushed open a heavy steel door leading to the back alley and was met with a blast of cold, damp air. And there she was, huddled between two overflowing dumpsters. Isabella was trying to make herself small, invisible. Her body was shaking, not from the cold, but from the force of the sobs she was desperately trying to stifle. Her professional facade had been utterly demolished. leaving behind a young woman in the throes of a grief so profound it seemed to suck the very air from the alley. She wasn't just crying over a rude customer or a difficult day. This was the sound of a spirit breaking. Alexander stood frozen in the doorway, the clatter of the distant kitchen fading into a dull roar in his ears. The man who could command boardrooms with a single word, who could move markets with a phone call, was utterly lost. He was the king in this castle, and in its shadow one of his people was weeping as if her world had ended. He had come looking for a problem he could fix with a memo and a new hire. But the raw, unfiltered agony in that alley told him this was something far deeper, far more complex. The story of the Gilded Spoon's decline wasn't written in its balance sheets. It was written in the tears of the girl huddled in the cold, and his investigation had just taken a deeply personal turn. He took a hesitant step forward, the gravel crunching under his worn boots, and cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "Are you all right?" Isabella's head snapped up, her tear-filled eyes wide with a mixture of shock and terror, like a startled thorn caught in the headlights of an oncoming truck. The sight of the man in the doorway sent a jolt of pure panic through Isabella. Her mind raced. A customer had someone followed her. She scrambled to her feet frantically, wiping at her tear-streaked face with the back of her hands, the rough fabric of her uniform sleeve scratching her skin. "I'm fine," she stammered, the words catching in her throat. "Just getting some air." It was a laughably poor lie, contradicted by the shuddering breaths she couldn't control. Alexander held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm sorry to intrude. I was just in the restaurant. My name is Arthur." He kept his voice low and steady, trying to project an aura of harmlessness. "You look distressed. I wanted to make sure you were safe." Isabella eyed him wearily. He didn't look like the usual clientele. His clothes were simple, his face etched with a quiet concern that seemed genuine, unlike the predatory pity she sometimes received. Still, years of fending for herself had built walls of caution around her heart. "Thank you, but I'm okay. I have to get back to my shift." She tried to sidestep him, to retreat back into the relative safety of the kitchen's cacophony, but he didn't move. He wasn't blocking her, merely holding his ground, creating a small pocket of stillness in the chaotic world. That manager, Marcus Alexander, set his tone conversational, but his eyes sharp with perception. He seems to run a tight ship. The name was a key, turning a lock in Isabella's composure. Her shoulders tensed, and a fresh wave of misery washed over her face. "He has high standards," she mumbled the corporate-approved euphemism, tasting like ash in her mouth. "There's a difference between high standards and cruelty," Alexander observed gently. "I saw how he spoke to you after that table complained. I saw how you handled them. You have more patience in your little finger than that man has in his entire body." His words, simple and direct, were so unexpected that they bypassed her defenses. No one ever stood up for her. No one ever noticed. In the brutal, fast-paced world of service, you were either keeping up or you were out. Sympathy was a luxury no one could afford. A choked sob escaped her lips before she could stop it. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't lose this job. I just can't." The desperation in her voice was a physical thing, a raw wound exposed. Alexander felt a powerful urge to fix it, to write a check, to fire the man responsible, to simply make the pain go away. But he knew that wasn't the answer. Not yet. He needed to understand. The undercover CEO in him needed the facts. But the man who remembered his own father, starting with a single struggling diner, needed to understand the story. "Talk to me, Isabella," he said, using her name for the first time. "I'm just a guy with a coffee and too much time on my hands. I'm a good listener. Sometimes just putting it into words helps." She hesitated, a war raging within her between a lifetime of self-reliance and the overwhelming need to confide in someone, anyone. She looked into his eyes, calm, steady, and without judgment, and a small part of her defenses crumbled. "It's not just him," she began, her voice barely audible above the city's hum. "It's everything." She didn't tell him the whole story. She couldn't. The weight of it was too much to place on a stranger. But she told him enough. She spoke of the constant pressure, the impossible demands from Marcus, who docked pay for the slightest infraction, a forgotten side of lemon, a water glass left empty for a minute too long. She spoke of the fear that permeated the staff, the way they were pitted against each other for the best shifts, the best tables. Marcus fostered an environment of cutthroat competition where camaraderie died and only suspicion thrived. He told me last week, she said, her gaze fixed on a crack in the pavement, that my performance was slipping. He said I seemed distracted. He put me on probation. One more mistake and I'm gone. She wrapped her arms around herself, a gesture of self-preservation. And I can't be gone. There's no backup plan. Alexander listened, his expression unchanging, but inside a cold fury was building. This was his restaurant, his father's legacy. It was meant to be a place of excellence and opportunity, not a private thief for a bully to torment his staff. Why do you stay? He asked the question direct but not unkind. There are other restaurants in Chicago. Isabella finally looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw the answer. It wasn't stubbornness or a lack of options. It was a fierce, desperate loyalty born of necessity. The pay here, it's better than most with the tips, and the health insurance is good. It's essential. The way she said the word essential told him everything. This wasn't about her. The stakes were higher than her own well-being. He didn't press for details about who the insurance was for. He had heard enough. Just then, the alley door creaked open and a young busboy, no older than 19, poked his head out. Bella Marcus is looking for you. He's on the warpath. Fear immediate and electric flashed across Isabella's face, erasing the brief moment of connection. Thank you, Carlos, she said, her voice regaining its professional hollowed-out tone. She turned to Alexander. I have to go. Thank you for listening. She scurried back inside, leaving Alexander alone in the alley. He remained for a few moments, the cold seeping into his bones. He watched through the grimy window of the kitchen door as Isabella approached Marcus. He couldn't hear their words, but he didn't need to. He saw Marcus's sneer, the sharp, angry gesture of his hand. He saw Isabella's posture shrink, her head bowed in submission as she nodded and hurried away. Alexander Sterling walked back into the opulent dining room of the Gilded Spoon, but he no longer saw the fine art on the walls or the crystal chandeliers. He saw a gilded come, and he saw the quiet, desperate struggles of those trapped within it. His mission was no longer just about business. It was about justice. He sat back down at his table, pulled out his phone, and sent a single encrypted text message to a number he rarely used. David, we have a problem at the Chicago flagship. I need a full discrete workup on a manager named Marcus Thorne. Finances, history, everything, and I need it yesterday. As he hit send, his gaze fell on Isabella now at another table, forcing a smile for a family with 2 small children. She knelt down to speak to a little girl who had dropped her doll, her face softening with a genuine warmth that was breathtaking in its contrast to her earlier despair. In that moment, Alexander knew he wasn't just going to fix a management problem, he was going to war for her. The response from David Chen came in less than 12 hours. It arrived not as an email or a formal report, but as a secure, self-deleting file on Alexander's encrypted laptop. David, a former military intelligence officer and now the unflappably loyal head of security for Sterling Hospitality Group, was a man of few words and immense capability. The file he sent was a masterclass in quiet, devastating efficiency. Alexander sat in his penthouse suite at the Sterling Hotel overlooking Millennium Park. The city lights a glittering tapestry below. He had barely slept. The image of Isabella's tear-streaked face was seared into his mind. He opened the file, and as he read, his cold anger began to solidify into icy resolve. David's report on Marcus Thorne was damning. On the surface, Thorne was a model manager. He had a decade of experience glowing in likely fabricated references and a knack for keeping front-of-house costs impressively low. But beneath that polished veneer was a cesspool of malfeasance. David had cross-referenced payroll records with security logs. Marcus was consistently altering employee time cards, shaving off 15 minutes here, half an hour there, a digital sleight of hand that amounted to thousands of dollars in stolen wages over the year. The employees, too, scared of losing their jobs to complain, were being bled dry. The report detailed a system of kickbacks, a specific linen supplier, a wine vendor, Even the company that serviced the dishwashers, all were charging Sterling Hospitality exorbitant rates. A little digging revealed that Marcus was receiving monthly payments from all three. He wasn't just a bully, he was a parasite feeding on the very establishment he was supposed to manage. But it was the next part that made Alexander's blood run cold. David had attached a series of audio files recorded by a two-person secret shopper team he had dispatched to the Gilded Spoon the previous evening on Alexander's orders. The team, posing as a wealthy couple on their anniversary, had engaged Marcus directly. Alexander clicked play. The audio was crystal clear. Female shopper. This chateau'd up is exquisite. We had it at a little place in Avenue last summer. Marcus Thorne, voice smooth, obsequious. An excellent choice. Only the best for our guests. It's one of our most exclusive vintages. Male shopper. It's so good. I'd love to buy a case. Is that possible? Marcus Thorne. A slight pause, then his voice drops conspiratorially. That can be arranged. The restaurant's official policy is against off-premise sales of our rarer stock. However, for a discerning client such as yourself, I could make a personal exception. It would, of course, have to be a private transaction, cash only. We wouldn't want to trouble the accountants, would we? Alexander slammed the laptop shut. Marcus wasn't just skimming. He was running a black market out of the restaurant cellar, selling off thousands of dollars worth of premium inventory and pocketing the cash. This explained the discrepancies in the beverage cost reports that headquarters had flagged, discrepancies that had been the initial trigger for Alexander's undercover visit. He leaned back, running a hand over his face. The scope of the corruption was staggering. This wasn't just one bad apple. This was a systemic failure. For Marcus to operate with such impunity, he either had to be a criminal mastermind or he had help. Someone higher up the food chain had to be turning a blind eye, or worse, enabling him. He pulled up another file. David had included a background check on Isabella Rossi. It was short and heartbreakingly simple. She was 24 years old. Her father had died in a construction accident 3 years prior, leaving her as the sole provider for her mother and her younger brother, Liam, who was 16. There was a long list of medical expenses linked to Liam. A quick search of the associated diagnostic codes told a grim story. A rare and aggressive form of juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. It was a chronic, debilitating disease that required a constant regimen of incredibly expensive biologic drugs. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The desperation, the fear of losing her job, the essential health insurance. Isabella wasn't just working for rent or groceries. She was working to keep her brother alive and mobile. She was trapped. And a predator like Marcus Thorne would know exactly how to exploit that kind of desperation. Alexander opened his phone again, his fingers hovering over David's contact. He needed to order him to dig deeper to find the connection higher up. But he stopped. If someone in his inner circle was involved, a wide-ranging internal investigation could tip them off. They would cover their tracks and Marcus would become the designated scapegoat. No, this required a more delicate touch. He had to play the part of Arthur Page a little longer. He changed back into his worn disguise. As he was about to leave, he glanced at the glossy corporate brochure on the hotel desk. It featured a photo of his executive team, all smiling, confident, successful. His eyes landed on Julian Croft, his chief operating officer. Julian had been with him for over a decade, a friend from his MBA program, the man he trusted implicitly to run the day-to-day operations of the global empire. Julian was the one who had promoted Marcus Thorne a year ago, citing his impressive cost control metrics. A knot of ice formed in Alexander's stomach. He trusted Julian with his life, but business had taught him that trust was often just a prelude to betrayal. He pushed the thought aside. It was too monstrous to consider. He walked out of the hotel and back toward the Gilded Spoon, not as a CEO preparing to clean house, but as a man descending deeper into the rabbit hole. He needed to see Isabella again to understand the full extent of the pressure she was under. He had the facts, the data, the evidence of financial crimes. But the heart of the story was still with the quiet waitress, and he knew with a grim certainty that her part in this was far from over. The threads were unraveling, and he feared where they might lead. The suspicion regarding Julian Croft was a venomous seed that once planted grew with terrifying speed. Alexander spent the next 48 hours in a state of controlled paranoia, functioning as the head of his company by day while secretly trying to dismantle a conspiracy from within. He couldn't shake the image of Julian's beaming face in the corporate photo juxtaposed with the memory of Marcus Thorne's oily voice on the secret shopper recording. He summoned Julian to his executive office, a sprawling space of glass and steel overlooking the Chicago River. He needed to look his old friend in the eye. "Julian, come in." Alexander set his voice a practiced calm as he gestured to a leather armchair. "I'm concerned about the numbers coming out of the Chicago flagship." Julian Croft entered the picture of corporate success. His suit was impeccably tailored, his silvering hair perfectly coiffed, his smile easy and confident. "Alex, good to see you. What's on your mind?" "I saw the Q3 reports. Beverage costs are a little high, but labor is well under budget. Thorne is running a tight ship." The casual mention of Marcus's name, the praise for his cost-cutting, sent a chill down Alexander's spine. It felt rehearsed. "The labor costs are low because he's stealing from his employees," Alexander stated flatly, watching Julian's reaction. "And the beverage costs are high because he's selling our inventory out to the back door." For a flicker of a second, a micro-expression of panic crossed Julian's face before it was replaced by a mask of shocked concern. "What?" "That's a serious accusation, Alex. Where's this coming from?" "I have it on good authority," Alexander said, intentionally vague. "I want to know how he got his position. You personally recommended him for the promotion." Julian leaned forward, his expression a perfect pantomime of a loyal executive, ready to solve a problem. "Of course I did. His record at the Denver property was exemplary. He cut waste by 20%. His references were stellar. If these allegations are true, I am as shocked as you are. He must have fooled us all. We need to launch an immediate internal audit. I'll get HR and loss prevention on it right away." It was the perfect corporate response. It was also the perfect way to take control of the investigation, to bury evidence, and to ensure the inquiry stopped with Marcus. Alexander saw the strategy with crystal clarity. Julian wanted to contain the damage, to offer up the pawn to save the king. "No," Alexander said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I'll be handling this personally. I don't want a word of this getting out until I say so. It needs to be contained." Julian's smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the edges. "Of course, Alex, whatever you think is best. I'm just stunned. To think this was happening right under our noses. It's a betrayal of everything Sterling stands for." "A betrayal," Alexander thought bitterly. "You have no idea." The meeting ended, but the confrontation left Alexander more convinced than ever. Julian's denial was too smooth, his surprise too theatrical. He had to find definitive proof, a smoking gun that linked the COO to the corrupt manager. He retreated to his penthouse and called David Chen again. "David, change of plans. Drop the discreet approach. I need you to go loud, but only where I direct. I need access to Julian Croft's office servers. I'm looking for any communication with Marcus Thorne, emails, texts, encrypted messages, and I need a full forensic accounting of every vendor account Thorne set up or Julian approved in the last 2 years. I'm looking for shell corporations, phantom invoices, anything." "That's high risk, Alex." David's voice was a low rumble on the other end of the line. "If Croft is dirty, he'll have digital tripwires everywhere. He'll know we're coming." "I know," Alexander said. "I'm counting on it. I want to see how he reacts when he feels the heat rattle his cage. See what falls out." While David's team of digital ghosts went to work, Alexander's thoughts returned to Isabella. She was the human cost of this corporate chess game. He needed to know if Marcus was using her brother's illness as leverage. The idea filled him with a rage so potent it was almost blinding. He went back to the Gilded Spoon that evening, once again as Arthur Page. He sat at the bar this time, nursing a club soda, watching. The atmosphere was even more tense than before. The staff moved with a frantic, nervous energy. Marcus was on the floor, his face a thunderous mask. He had clearly sensed a shift in the currents, a new pressure from above, though he didn't yet know its source. Alexander saw him corner Isabella near a service station. He was too far away to hear, but their body language told the story. Marcus was leaning in close, his voice a low, menacing hiss. Isabella stood rigid, her face pale, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. He saw her shake her head, a small, defiant gesture. Marcus grabbed her arm. It was a fleeting motion, possessive and threatening, lasting only a second before he let go. But Alexander saw it. His hands tightened around his glass, the crystal creaking under the pressure. He fought every instinct, telling him to cross the room and tear the man apart. Isabella broke away from the conversation, her eyes wide and haunted. She hurried toward the kitchen, and their eyes met for a brief moment across the bustling room. In her gaze, he saw not just fear, but a desperate plea. Something had escalated. Marcus wasn't just bullying her anymore. He was demanding something. Later that night, Alexander's phone buzzed. It was David. "You were right, Alex. We found it. It's a Shell Corporation Precision Hospitality Solutions, registered in Delaware. It's the parent company for 3 of Thorne's preferred vendors. For the last 18 months, Sterling has been paying grossly inflated invoices to this company. The money trail is a labyrinth, but we found the terminus, a private offshore account in the Cayman Islands." Alexander held his breath. "Whose name is on it?" There was a pause. Julian Croft. The confirmation felt like a punch to the gut. It was one thing to suspect, another to know. The betrayal was absolute. Julian, his friend, the man he'd trusted, had been systematically robbing him for years. "There's more," David said, his voice grim. "We tripped one of Croft's alarms. 30 minutes ago, a remote wipe command was initiated on his office desktop and his cloud storage. We managed to intercept and clone the drives before the wipe was complete. But he knows we're on to him. He's going to run, or he's going to do something drastic to cover his tracks." Alexander's mind raced, connecting the dots. Julian feeling the heat, Marcus feeling the pressure from Julian. Marcus turning that pressure onto the most vulnerable person he could find, Isabella? That conversation he'd witnessed wasn't just a manager berating an employee. It was a conspirator trying to secure an accomplice or silence a witness. Isabella was in danger. The thought hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had started this to fix a business problem, but he had inadvertently lit a fuse on a powder keg, and Isabella was standing right next to it. "David," he said, his voice low and hard, "get your team ready. We're ending this tonight." The world had shrunk to the size of the narrow, dimly lit service corridor behind the main kitchen. For Isabella, the ambient sounds of the gilded spoon, the clatter of pans, the distant laughter, the murmur of 100 conversations had faded into a dull, meaningless roar. The only thing she could hear was the frantic pounding of her own heart and the sound of Marcus Thorne's voice, a venomous whisper that coiled around her like a snake. "You're not listening to me, Isabella," he said, his smile a grotesque slash in his face. He had her cornered between a stainless steel prep table and a stack of linen cards. "This isn't a request. This is your only option." He had approached her an hour earlier, his usual arrogance replaced by a slick, predatory urgency. He knew about Liam. He didn't say how he didn't have to. He just let the knowledge hang in the air, a threat more potent than any raised voice. He knew the name of her brother's specialist, the exorbitant cost of the next round of treatments, and the fact that her insurance was nearing its lifetime cap for that specific medication. "There's a delivery coming tonight," Marcus explained, his eyes glinting. "A large shipment of wine and prime beef. The invoice is inflated. An accounting error." His smile widened. "All I need you to do is sign the receiving docket. Confirm that everything arrived as stated. That's it. A simple signature." Isabella felt sick. She knew exactly what he was asking. He was making her an accessory to his theft. "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. "Marcus, that's fraud." "Don't be so dramatic," he scoffed. "It's a rounding error in a multi-billion-dollar company. A drop in the ocean. No one will ever notice." "I'll notice," she said, a flicker of her father's stubborn pride igniting within her. "I can't do it." That was when his demeanor shifted. The faux-friendly mask dissolved, revealing the cold, hard cruelty beneath. "You think you have a choice?" he sneered. "You're on probation. I can fire you right now for insubordination. And I won't just fire you, Bella. I will personally call every restaurant manager I know from here to Milwaukee. I will tell them you're a thief, that you're unreliable, that you have a drug problem. I will destroy your reputation so completely, You won't be able to get a job washing dishes in a back alley dive. Your brother needs that insurance, doesn't he? It would be a shame if something happened to it. The threat, direct and vile, sucked the air from her lungs. He was aiming for the very foundation of her world. For Liam, every exhausting double shift, every swallowed insult, every moment of biting her tongue, it had all been for her brother. Marcus was threatening to burn it all to the ground. Now, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper again, let's talk about the alternative. You help me, and I help you. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. He fanned the edges, revealing stacks of $100 bills. $10,000 cash, a generous advance on your salary for your brother's medical fund. No questions asked. All for one little signature. Isabella stared at the money. It was a fortune. It was the cost of the next 2 treatments. It was a temporary reprieve from the crushing weight of debt and fear that was her constant companion. It was a lifeline, and it was poison. To take it would be to sell the last thing she had left, her integrity. Her father had been a simple man, a construction worker with calloused hands and a spine of steel. You do the right thing, Bella, he used to say, even when it's the hard thing, especially when it's the hard thing. Tears welled in her eyes as she thought of him and of Liam, whose quiet courage in the face of constant pain put all her own struggles to shame. What would he think of her if she did this? I need to think, she stammered, backing away. You have until the delivery truck arrives at 10. Marcus hissed, his eyes cold and flat. Don't make the wrong decision. She fled to the momentary sanctuary of the staff locker room, her body trembling. The choice was impossible. On one hand, her conscience, her father's memory, the risk of getting caught. On the other, Liam's health, the immediate relief from an unbearable financial burden, and the very real threat of Marcus destroying her life. She thought of the kindy man in the alley, Arthur. She wished she could talk to him, but he was just a stranger, a fleeting moment of kindness in a sea of trouble. He couldn't help her now. No one could. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her mother. Liam had a good day. He's asking when you'll be home. He wants to show you a new drawing. He did. The simple domestic message broke her. The drawing. Liam's hands, so often swollen and painful, had managed to create something. He was fighting. How could she not fight for him, using any weapon she could find? Her resolve hardened not with righteousness, but with the grim, soul-crushing pragmatism of a soldier on a battlefield. Her integrity was a luxury she couldn't afford when her brother's well-being was on the line. At 5 minutes to 10, her face pale, but her expression set. Isabella walked back out to the loading dock where Marcus was waiting by the open bay door, a clipboard in his hand. The night air was cold, but she didn't feel it. She felt a profound numbness, a chilling acceptance of the bargain she was about to make. I'm glad you came to your senses, Marcus said with a triumphant smirk, handing her the pen and clipboard. A large delivery truck was backing up to the dock, its reverse alarm beeping Oriole rhythm. Just sign at the bottom. Isabella took the pen. Her hand was shaking. She looked down at the fraudulent document at the line waiting for her signature. This was it. The moment she crossed the line from which she could never return. She took a deep, shuddering breath and lowered the pen to the paper. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Miss Rosie. The voice was calm, authoritative, and utterly unexpected. It cut through the tense silence of the loading dock, and Isabella's head snapped up the pen, hovering a millimeter above the paper. Marcus spun around, his face contorting in rage at the interruption. Stepping out of the shadows of the alley was a figure who was both familiar and a complete stranger. It was the man from the alley, Arthur, the freelance writer with the kind eyes. But he was not the same man. The worn hoodie and baseball cap were gone, replaced by a dark, impeccably tailored suit that spoke of immense wealth and power. His posture had changed. He stood taller, his presence commanding the space around him. The gentle concern in his eyes had been replaced by a flinty, uncompromising hardness. He was flanked by 2 large, stern-faced men, one of whom was David Chen. "Who the hell are you?" Marcus snarled, stepping in front of Isabella protectively, as if shielding his prize. "This is a private area." The man ignored him completely, his gaze fixed on Isabella. "My name is Alexander Sterling," he said. his voice resonating with an authority that vibrated in the air. "I own this restaurant and everything in it." The world tilted on its axis. Isabella stared at him, her mind struggling to reconcile the gentle Arthur with the formidable man standing before her. Alexander Sterling. The name was on the sign on her paycheck, a near mythical figurehead she had never imagined she would see. The CEO. He had been here all along, watching, listening. The realization washed over her in a wave of shock, followed by a dizzying mixture of fear and a tiny, irrational spark of hope. Marcus's bravado evaporated instantly, replaced by a sickly greenish pall. He stammered, Mr. Sterling, I had no idea. This is a misunderstanding. I was just having this employee sign off on the evening's delivery. I know exactly what you were doing, Mr. Thorne," Alexander said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet tone. "I know about the doctored time cards. I know about the kickbacks from the vendors. And I know about you selling my wine cellar out the back door for your own personal profit." With each accusation, another layer of color drained from Marcus's face. He was cornered, his lies stripped bare. "And I know," Alexander continued, his eyes now burning with a cold fire, "that you tried to use this young woman's family tragedy to blackmail her into becoming your accomplice." In a last desperate act of self-preservation, Marcus pointed a trembling finger at Isabella. "She's in on it. It was her idea. She's the one who approached me desperate for money." Alexander took a slow, deliberate step forward, and Marcus flinched back as if struck. "You will not speak her name again," Alexander commanded. "You are a parasite, Mr. Thorne, a common thief who preys on the vulnerable. You are a disgrace to this company and everything my father built." As if on cue, the side door to the restaurant burst open. Two uniformed Chicago police officers stepped through, followed by a man in a rumpled suit. The man was pale, sweating profusely, and his hands were cuffed behind his back. It was Julian Croft. His eyes, wide with panic, met Alexander's for a moment, before falling to the floor in shame. He had clearly been intercepted before he could flee. It was him. Marcus shrieked, his voice cracking with desperation as he saw his ultimate protector in chains. Julian Croft. He was the mastermind. He set up the shell companies. He approved the invoices. I was just following his orders. "Oh, you'll have plenty of time to tell your story to the authorities." "I assure you," David Chen said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He nodded to the officers who moved forward and efficiently placed Marcus Thorne in handcuffs. The fight had gone out of him completely, and he slumped in defeat, muttering about betrayal. As the officers led Marcus and Julian away, a profound silence descended on the loading dock, broken only by the hum of the truck's engine and the distant city sirens. Alexander, David, Isabella, and the truck driver were all that remained. Alexander turned his full attention to Isabella. She was still standing frozen, the clipboard clutched in her hand like a shield, her face a mask of shock and bewilderment. He walked over to her and gently took the clipboard from her trembling fingers, tossing it onto a nearby crate. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softening, the warmth returning to his eyes. Isabella could only nod, words failing her. She felt like she had just been pulled from the path of a speeding train. "You were going to sign it," he stated, not as an accusation, but as a quiet observation. Tears welled in Isabella's eyes, shame and relief roaring within her. "My brother," she choked out the words, a raw, painful confession. "He needs his medicine. I didn't know what else to do." "You did the only thing you thought you could do for someone you love," Alexander said, his voice thick with an empathy that stunned her. "You were put in an impossible position by men with no honor. What you were about to do was wrong, but what was done to you was a far greater crime." He paused, his gaze searching her face. "You didn't sign it, Isabella. When it came down to it, you hesitated. That's what matters." He reached into his suit jacket, and for a terrifying moment, she thought he was going to pull out an envelope of severance pay. Instead, he handed her a simple, elegant business card. Alexander Sterling, CEO, Sterling Hospitality Group. Below it was a private cell phone number. "Go home," he said gently. "Take the rest of the week off with pay. On Monday morning, I want you to call me on that number. We're going to talk about your brother, and we're going to talk about your future." Isabella stared at the card, then up at the face of the man who had turned her world upside down in the span of a single evening. He was not just a CEO. He was the stranger who had found her crying in an alley and had chosen to listen. And in doing so, he had saved her from more than just a corrupt manager. He had saved her from herself. The weekend passed in a surreal haze for Isabella. She spent the time in her family's small, cramped apartment. The quiet normalcy of it a stark contrast to the explosive drama of Friday night. She watched Liam draw, helped her mother cook, and tried to process the fact that the billionaire owner of her company knew her name and had her brother's fate in his hands. The business card felt impossibly heavy in her pocket. Each time her fingers brushed against it, a jolt of anxiety and fragile hope shot through her. On Monday morning, her hands trembling, she dialed the number. He answered on the second ring. Isabella. Alexander Sterling's voice was warm and professional. I'm glad you called. Could you and your mother meet me this afternoon? There's someone I'd like you to meet. I'm sending a car for you at 1 Hexagon. At precisely 1 Hexagon, a sleek black town car, the kind Isabella had only ever seen in movies, pulled up to her modest apartment building. The ride downtown was silent, her mother clutching her hand, her face a mixture of awe and apprehension. The car didn't stop at the Gilded Spoon or the Sterling Hotel, but at the entrance to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Waiting for them in the lobby was Alexander, dressed not in a power suit, but in a simple cashmere sweater and slacks. He looked approachable, almost gentle. Standing beside him was a woman with kind, intelligent eyes and a white lab coat. Isabella Maria, Alexander said with a welcoming smile. This is Dr. Annabelle Foster. She's one of the country's leading pediatric rheumatologists. I flew her in from Johns Hopkins this morning. I've sent her Liam's files and she believes there are new treatment protocols that could make a significant difference for him. Isabella's mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. Isabella felt a wave of dizziness, the sheer magnitude of the gesture overwhelming her. This went beyond generosity. It was a life-altering act of kindness. Dr. Foster shook their hands warmly. From what I've read, Liam is a real fighter, she said. I'm very optimistic about what we can achieve together. Alexander then addressed them both, his tone serious but compilate. The Sterling Foundation, my family's charitable trust, will be covering all of Liam's medical expenses from this day forward. That includes Dr. Foster's consultation, all future treatments, physical therapy, whatever he needs. Your family's only job is to focus on him getting better. All the financial burdens are gone. Isabella finally broke. The tears she had been holding back for months, for years, finally fell. Not tears of sorrow or despair, but of profound, bone-deep relief. The weight she had carried for so long, the crushing, relentless pressure, was lifted in an instant. She could barely stammer out a thank you, the words feeling utterly inadequate. After they had spent an hour with Dr. Foster, mapping out a new hopeful future for Liam, Alexander drove them back to the hotel for a late lunch, this time in his private suite. I have one more proposition for you, Isabella, he said once they were settled. The Gilded Spoon needs a new manager, but more than that, my entire company needs a new perspective. What happened with Marcus and Julian revealed a deep sickness in our corporate culture. I was so focused on the balance sheets that I forgot about the people who are the true heart of this company. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. I'm creating a new position at the corporate level, an employee advocacy and wellness manager. It will be their job to be the voice of our staff to ensure fair treatment, to create channels for grievances to be heard without fear of retribution, and to build a culture of respect, not fear. I want you to be the first person to hold that title. Isabella was stunned into silence. Me? But I'm a waitress. I don't have a business degree or any corporate experience. You have something more important, Alexander countered. You have integrity. You have empathy. You have lived the experience of the people this role is designed to protect. You know what it's like to be put in an impossible position? I can teach you the business side of things. I can't teach you to have a good heart. You already have that. You hesitated on that loading dock, Isabella, in the face of unimaginable pressure your character held. That's the kind of person I want, helping me rebuild. He offered her a starting salary that was more than she had ever dreamed of making in a year, a full benefits package, and a promise of his personal mentorship. It wasn't just a job, it was a new life, a new beginning built not on a moment of weakness, but on the strength she showed when it mattered most. A week later, Isabella Rossi walked through the front doors of the Sterling Hospitality Group's corporate headquarters, not as a server, but as an executive. The Gilded Spoon was temporarily closed for a management restructure, and a full transparent audit was being conducted across the entire company. Alexander Sterling stood by his office window, watching the city below. He had rooted out the corruption, but the victory felt different than closing a business deal. It was deeper, more meaningful. He had come to his restaurant looking for a problem with his business and had found a problem with his own soul. In helping Isabella in seeing the human cost of his own inattention, he had begun to rebuild more than just his company. He had begun to rebuild its foundation on the very principles his father had valued most: dignity, integrity, and the simple, profound power of human kindness. The Gilded Spoon would reopen not just as a place of fine dining, but as a promise. A promise that the person clearing your table was valued just as much as the person paying the bill. The story of Alexander and Isabella isn't just a tale of a rich boss and a struggling waitress. It's a powerful reminder that beneath the surface of our daily lives, everyone is fighting a battle we know nothing about. It shows that true leadership isn't about power or profit, but about compassion and the courage to look for the humanity in the people you meet. A single moment of empathy, of truly seeing another person's struggle, can change everything. It can expose lies, heal wounds, and build a new future from the ashes of betrayal. This story proves that the most valuable asset any person or any company can have is a character that holds true even in the darkest of moments. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire and move you. And please leave a comment below sharing a time when a small act of kindness made a big difference in your life. Thank you for listening.